We have two of the best minds in RevOps here on stage, Anil Kumar from Asana, Haley Katsman from Highspot. I'll ask you to introduce yourselves, give us a little bit about your background, what you do. We'll start with you, Anil.
All right. Can you all hear me? Great. Let's make it as much of a conversation as possible. We've got a good group here. My name is Anil Kumar. I lead revenue operations at Asana. We've got some good friends here in the audience. Thank you for joining. Very, very excited to be here. RevOps is very much my craft, my trade, a thing that I love and a thing that I've done for years. And it's one of those things where the more you do it, the more you appreciate what we do and the value of what it brings.
Hi, I'm Haley Katsman. I am the VP of Revenue Operations and Enablement at Highspot. I've been there for about 9 years now and pretty much held every role on the go-to-market side. And it's been really exciting over the past couple of years leading our revenue operations team and really scaling our growth. So I'm excited to dive in.
Beautiful. Okay. If you ask 10 different people, you get 10 different answers about what is revenue operations. So let's hear a quick definition of what RevOps is, and then we're going to talk about what RevOps isn't. We'll start with you, Haley. What is RevOps to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you just really simplify it down, I mean, we are operationalizing revenue growth. I mean, that's really what we're doing. And if you think about what that means, we're really looking at how do we grow that in a predictable, in a scalable way. And I think as the market has really turned from being growth at all costs to really looking at profitability, from an operations standpoint, we're really looking at the top line and the bottom line and how do we drive efficient and effectiveness across all of our go-to-market teams in order to drive that revenue growth.
I love that answer because it's not just, here's the different functions that are coming together. It's marketing ops plus sales ops plus CS. You didn't mention any of that. Yeah. It's all about the outcome that you're driving.
I'm like one past that.
Yeah, I love that. Anil, how about you?
Now, I think people get caught up too often in the org structure, right? When we started RevOps, whatever number of years ago, it was, all right, I'm going to bring those teams together. That's not what it is, right? Like that might be a piece of what we do, but it goes back to both the outcome, the objective, and the North Star. The North Star for all of us is one thing and one thing only, and that is to accelerate revenue as fast as earthly possible. And that goes back to what you said around efficiency and effectiveness. All right, what does that mean? Efficiency and effectiveness, it starts with actually what we're talking about here, what we're going to talk about, which is own the operating rhythm. Well, what the heck is an operating rhythm, right? What does that actually mean? To me, it means what you are building, right? You are building the processes, you're building the systems, you're building the analytics, you're building the strategy, you're building the enablement. Really what you are building is the backbone for a revenue team. That is what we all do. We build the backbone of a revenue team, and the way we do it is we solve really, really gnarly problems, right? The things that people don't want to do, that's what we do. Whether it's the data, whether it's the systems, whether it's the processes, that's what we do. And again, the end goal for anybody in RevOps, it's to accelerate revenue.
When RevOps fails at a company, it almost always is because they're seen as like a back office function. They're just admins. They're managing tools or systems. And yes, that's a part of it. But what happened? Why? Why does that happen, Haley? And how do you avoid that?
Yeah, I think that it can go south when you think of it as just a team that's managing your tech stack. I think that is usually where I see it kind of go south. And I think a big part of that too is when they're operating in a very reactive manner and not thinking about the overall revenue strategy and how you're going to drive that incremental growth when it's very much, you know, and we've talked a little bit about this, but when it's very much a reactive manner and it's very focused on tools and not focused as much on outcomes. Because at the end of the day, if you have a team that's only kind of taking orders from the field, if you will, there's no one looking end to end around what the actual best solution is to drive the business forward. And so when it's kind of an order taking, you know, managing your tech stack type team, I think that's when it can kind of go south.
That makes a lot of sense. Anil, we were talking about this before, and you surprised me with your take on this because you said, well, that order taking actually is a part of the job. And so, you know, a lot of people say, I want to be in RevOps, but I want to be strategic. Yeah. And they only want to focus on the strategy and getting a seat at the table in that way. But you said you have to kind of swim through the mud a little bit to earn a seat at the table.
100%. And, you know, we talked about this last week, right? Haley's absolutely right. And if you think of yourself that way, then you will be that. Like, to me, when you think about what our goal is and how we're structured, that's a mindset. If I think of myself only as an admin, only as an order taker, that's what I'm going to be. like day in and day out. But to go to your point, I made this mistake earlier in my career, and it was a big mistake where I walked into an org. I had this really great title, big team, the whole thing, and I was like, I'm just going to be that strategic partner to a CRO or to a COO. And if you spend all your time at that altitude, you will miss the boat, because at the end of the day, right, what's the goal? It's to accelerate revenue. Well, how do you accelerate revenue? You eliminate the drag in your process, right, in your operating cadence. The way you eliminate that drag is by actually doing that reactive work. And what I remember very distinctly at that point in my career, I wasn't listening to the field well enough. I wasn't listening to the floor, to my AEs and my SDRs on what was their most acute pain point. So for me, anybody, whether it is someone leading revenue operations or someone who's a first-time analyst, you got to be able to speak at every altitude and be willing to get in the grind. If you can't get in the grind, you're going to miss the boat in a big way.
Have you had a similar experience, Haley?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best, like, quote unquote, strategic leaders, they really can bridge the gap between strategy and execution. And if you only do strategy, you'll fail. If you only do execution, you'll fail. But those that can bridge the gap between the two, that's where the magic happens. And, to Anil's point, you have to get in the mud a lot of times to really make sure that the strategy that's being developed can work, or where there needs to be improvements, where it needs to be optimized. And a lot of times people come up with strategy that's just not grounded in reality at all. It's like that wouldn't actually work when you want to go and take that to the field. And so I think from an operations standpoint, it's really grounding the business in reality of what's possible. And that's just, most people that want to be super strategic aren't willing to like really get into the execution. And I think that's the magic of this function, is bridging that gap.
Well, you also have operations, strategy, and enablement.
Yeah,
so what's the kind of 1 + 1 = 3 of that combination?
Well, I think that if you really think about, the overall revenue engine, right? So if you take, most companies are, looking at a set of, strategic initiatives that are looking to drive incremental revenue growth, right? Like you're launching a new product, you acquire a new company, you're going into a new market, new personas, whatever that may be. You have to both have the ability to operationalize that, again, bridge the strategy and execution and make sure that the process, the data, the systems, the insights are all available. But then from an enablement standpoint, you have to like equip and train and coach your reps to then actually go and like leverage the operational process to make that a reality. And if you aren't thinking about those in tandem, it becomes, you might have a great process, but if the reps aren't doing it, then you have a different problem. And so, kind of getting a little bit more on the org side, but for us at Highspot, the team that I lead, it's enablement, operations, and analytics, and you really need all of those working together in order to drive that strategy all the way through to execution and understand what's working and what's not working, and then optimize it as fast as possible. Because the quicker you have that feedback loop, the faster you're able to, really just beat out the competition and win market share, right? If it's slow, then you're just delaying growth.
It makes a lot of sense. Anil, how do you bring those functions together to experience that similar sort of working environment?
Well, I'll start with it's tricky, and anyone on my team knows that it's tricky. But before we even talk about how we do it, I want to go back to why those functions go together, right? To me, if you go back to the evolution of RevOps, yeah, it started with marketing ops, sales ops, and CS ops being together, but that's not it. It's actually the three that you talked about, right? Operations, enablement, and strategy. It's exactly what Haley was saying, right? If you think through each of those pieces, strategy helps build the design. It is the long term. Operations helps build the process and optimize it. And enablement, that ensures that the field is getting what you're doing, right? That you're not just designing change, you're affecting change, and that change is something that people are actually taking on. You have to bring those together. So yeah, if I'm a COO or a CRO, depending on the needs of an org, I think putting those three together make a ton of sense. That's how you unlock value. That's how you get the step change. Now to your question, what happens when you don't have that? Well, as my team knows, if you don't have that, then you got to find a way to create that. And what I mean there is take the inverse of everything I just said. If you have silos of analytics, operations, and enablement, good does not happen, right? In silos, people build their own thing. It's redundant. They're not talking to each other. You miss the mark on the end goal, right? Whether it is building an operating cadence, implementing a tool, accelerating how you get actual attainment for reps, all of that, you miss the boat there. So for me, how you get there is, quite honestly, you treat it as one team, right? You know this. We treat it as a tiger team where you get the people who are leading on the operations side, who are actually doing the operations, doing the enablement, and doing the strategy, and you put them in a room together. I think building those tiger teams based on specific objectives of what you're trying to hit, that goes a long way. That, and I think from our side, right, it is that mindset of if you treat it as one team, if you see each other as one team, good things happen.
How do you get the organizational support to do this? I know, Haley, you've been at Highspot for many years, but how do you get the tops-down support that says, yes, we need to bring these functions together?
I think you have to prove it out, right? Like if you have silos in your organization, taking the approach, that Anil just said, you treat it like it is one organization, and instead of worrying, I oftentimes see people worry so much about the org design, and you can just get so hung up on that, and it can delay you for forever. So if you think about, creating that tiger team, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to get the whole org, all three of those, as an example, working together on everything all the time. But, what I've done and what I would recommend anyone that's struggling with this right now is take one of your initiatives that's like most critical for your growth and cut it by the initiative as opposed to thinking about it across the org, right? So take something that you need to operationalize, get your reps to be able to do, you need to enable them, and tie that to revenue and prove it out, right? So if there's a specific, initiative, project, whatever that is, if you prove that out in the organization and tie that to outcomes, then you can say, hey, when we did this versus this, we were successful, and then you can kind of, prove out the model. For most organizations, I think the stat is like 74% of initiatives fail in most organizations, right? And so if you can pick one and drive it successfully through your organization and prove it out, create a business case, show exactly what you did, what the outcomes were, that then becomes a compelling story for you to be able to make larger changes, like org changes within the organization.
Makes perfect sense. Anil, looked like you were about to chime in.
Yeah, no, what I was going to say, what I love about that is that's focus, right? Like, check your ego at the door. I don't care where actual teams sit. Life today is about being as fast as possible, being agile, and again, think about dotted lines. But it comes back to that focus. If you pick the initiatives that are focused on the biggest pain point for an org, and you rally the way that Haley was saying, that's how good things happen.
And you mentioned earlier the operating rhythm, kind of that cadence that you have. We hear a lot of people talk about it as the 13-week cadence that kind of controls the quarter. How do you start, Anil? Like, what do you do to win all those different revenue moments that take place across the quarter?
This one's fun, and I almost want to hear your answer first, because we're going to come at it different ways, right? Haley's been at Highspot for 9 years, so you've built the evolution. You're coming at it at scale. For me, very often, I think about Asana. I came in and there wasn't, you're starting almost from scratch, and you're trying to do as much as fast as possible. So when I think about operating cadence, take a step back, right? An operating cadence is what do you do in your daily rhythm? Then from there, your weekly, your monthly, your quarterly. You tie that together, you build an annual plan. Probably walk through the details of each of those, but if I had to just pick one thing and start with it, right? To me, it is the daily rhythm is how do I actually manage a deal? Do I have the right sales processes and stages in place that make sense for the rhythm of that business? Once you put that in place, then it's about your forecasting rhythm, right? Your forecasting rhythm is your weekly rhythm. You build the discipline, the fidelity, and the consistency around that. That allows you to have more transparency. That allows you to have more visibility into how a business performs. Once you do that, then you can build on top of that. Want to walk through kind of your key favorite pieces of an operating rhythm?
Yeah, it's definitely, like you said, it's not something that's built overnight. So it's taken many years for us to get to this place. But I think the big, kind of from a maturity standpoint, if you almost think about it, I think we're give us the benefit of the doubt, but I think that we're a little bit more on the mature side from a planning and a rhythm standpoint. And I think one of the key pivots that I saw as a signal that was made that was like, we're really driving the rhythm is when, the setting of our revenue targets, and not year over year growth, but like one click below that, was handed over from finance to us. That was a big signal then, because you're able to, instead of just building your rhythm from the bottom up, you're able to do a top down and bottom up rhythm and planning process. And so for us, we're really looking at, okay, what's our year over year revenue growth, the targets that we need to get there, and then we really are driving, okay, how are we going to get there? So we're looking at, what's the mix of revenue by segment, by industry, by, all of those details. That then helps us define what those strategic initiatives are, which starts at the beginning of the year. And then we go and kind of do the bottoms up. What roles do we need to have in place? What are those roles and responsibilities, the processes? How do we want to make adjustments to the sales process? That all goes into kind of the fiscal planning process. And then we run more of a rhythm throughout the year that has the, weekly, monthly, quarterly cadences that drive a really consistent process where it's very clear what the expectations of the teams are. And then we're very methodically and systematically managing performance against those expectations so that we always know where we're over or underachieving.
Here's the thing on operating cadences. What Haley just mentioned, that's the holy grail, right? When you think about where the unlock is in how you can accelerate revenue, it's really good operating plans. And it's exactly what Haley said in terms of how you design that. That's the thing that you want to lead to, absolutely get to that point. The day-to-day, right, is in fact, it is your weekly rhythm that comes via forecasting. So to me, you start with a block, but ultimately if you get to that, that's when you're actually scaling an org and you're really inflecting change for it.
And then I think the forecasting part of the rhythm is that, if you think about that top down, that's more the strategy. And then the, day-to-day rhythm is kind of the execution side of it. If you're doing it really well, like we will look at our forecast and maybe make adjustments to our strategy based on what we're seeing. Right? Because you don't want to just wait till the end of the year to say hey, actually, we think we should move up market or move into this geo, whatever it is. The beautiful thing about forecasting is giving you visibility and predictability into where you are going to over or underachieve from a revenue standpoint. Don't you want to adjust your strategy as you're seeing those signals? And if you can do that, that's where, again, you're able to iterate at a faster rate relative to your competition.
I would love an example from each of you on how that happened, how you went from that insight about what's likely to happen based on the forecast and predictability, and then the action you took to either double down on a bet that was working or course correct perhaps on a bet that wasn't. Anything spring to mind?
I'll give you two. When you create a buttoned up forecasting and pipeline process, you start to know what works and what doesn't work. Specifically what I mean there is, if I have a team where I see the conversion rate go faster in a particular segment, I want to know why. And I want to see, is that a bet worth doubling down on, either in expanding that team or conversely, if they don't have enough pipe coverage, if their close rates stink, if there's something that's showing me that their TAM is off, what do I do to rejigger that? So that's a example. An even more tactical one is, say you see a team or a rep starting to win deals against a competitor, you're going to find that in your pipe reviews and in your forecasting. Well, guess what? That can then turn into a competitive takeout that you take to marketing and you co-partner to basically accelerate or throw gas on the fire. So it's exactly what Haley said. You're forecasting. When you forecast well, you will build confidence in your operating rhythm. And that's going to then inform how you capacity model, how you hire folks, where you make your big bets. That transparency, though, comes from the signals that you see there.
How about you, Haley? Anything?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a lot of them, but maybe one good example. So it was very intuitive for our business, especially as everything's shifting to looking at more profitability over growth, to say take everything up market. The margins are better up market, right? So take everything up market. And so a big, strategy being driven kind of top down is, how do we make our model more efficient in those, lower SMB type segments, right? And it's very intuitive for, a finance team or whomever to just be well, just cut it. Just move everything and go, right? They're the margins suck relative to up margins. So just cut it, right? And what was interesting is when we looked at, our business, yes, do you need to get the margins to be better and look at, what CAC looks like and all of those things and make adjustments there? Yes. But actually, when we looked at our forecast, that part of our business was to keep the lights on. And it's where we had consistency and predictability. And we actually had a much higher forecast accuracy in the lower markets than in the upper markets, because in the upper markets, our sales cycles are so much longer that it ebbs and flows a lot more. And so what would have happened if we didn't have rigor and visibility from a forecasting standpoint is they would have just said, just move everything up market. And instead, we just got better in the lower markets and made sure that the margins are great, that they're profitable, that we're, making sure that we have really high attainment. But it actually ended up being a huge, 25% of our revenue, and just eliminating that would have been huge. And so I think, again, it's where again, that balance between strategy and execution, it's like you can have great ideas from a strategy standpoint, but you got to like actually get in the details and make sure that it makes sense. And we would have made a wrong decision had we not had that visibility and insight. And I think that that's, really important.
Getting into the details. And Anil, I want to go back to what we talked about earlier, how you got to be in the mud. And you got to figure out how to do the hard work. And I think a lot of times, especially at more senior levels, people are a little less willing to get into the weeds and figure things out. And when we were talking last week, you said, RevOps is a hard job. Like you have to prepare yourself for the difficulty of this job. If you come in and you think that everything's going to be sunshine and rainbows, you're going to be very unpleasantly surprised. So my question to you is, why do this? Like, why put yourself through it if it's so painful, if it's so torturous?
I wish I had a good answer to that.
Sick and twisted.
I really do, right? I've been doing operations for 18 years, and you don't do it unless you wake up in the morning and you know that today is going to be an incredibly hard day. And there might be 4 fire drills, and we may or may not know how they're going to turn out. But at the end of the day, if I can make positive incremental change, and if I can find a way to support and accelerate revenue, then I'm doing my job, right? The reason why I said that is too often all of us go to these panels and it's be strategic, be a thought partner. And yes, of course, that's what we want to do. That's what we aspire to do. But damn, you got to be in the thick. Like, I don't know how else to put it. Like, you have to embrace the thick, and you have to be comfortable with it, and you have to be good at it. If you don't like the details, this is not the job. How long did we spend QAing Clari when we rolled it out? A long time, days upon days upon days. And it was one of those things where this was not going to be a 30-minute session. This was going to be, Hans, clear your calendar for 3 days until we get this thing right. Because if we don't get it right, then a CRO is not going to trust us. If a CRO doesn't trust us, guess what? A sales team's not going to trust us. So 1, embrace the thick. 2, you got to be willing to and like this job. But 3, you got to think about why we do it. At the end of the day, we do it because we're accelerating revenue. We're helping the people who keep the lights on, and we're doing it in the way that we know to do it best, which is by being builders.
Anything you'd add, Haley? It's pretty inspirational.
Yeah, I mean, I think that at the end of the day, like most people in their roles, they want to be able to make an impact at the organization, right? Like that's, and there isn't really a role where you can see like tangibly the impact that you're having more than this role. And I think too that, when you get, a lot of people want to go into strategy because they want to have a seat at the table. And having a seat at the table doesn't mean that you're just bringing a bunch of good ideas. Like, I think people think they're like, oh, I have all these really good ideas. Like, I need to get into a strategy role and I want like a seat at the table, right? Most really, really senior leaders, like board members, C-suite, the best thing that you can do is tell them where they're wrong. That's what they want to hear. They want to hear no. They want to hear where they're wrong. They want to hear where they could potentially mess up. And if you're not in the mud, you're not in the details, you will never have the insight in telling them where they're going to mess up. We always talk about being able to look around corners, and that's really what, I see a big part of my job is with our C-suite is I help them look around corners to make sure that they're not making the wrong decision. And again, you can't look around the corners unless you're in the thick of it.
That's right. And so strategy important, yes, but execution in many cases is more important. Like you have to actually be able to go and make something happen. And that's what this operating rhythm really is. It's kind of like the 0 to 1. You got to get something off the ground, and then it's the 1 to 10. We got to figure out how to perfect it. So Anil, back to you.
We talked about this a little bit last week. Execution is how you move things. End of the day, right? That is how you actually move things, but it's beyond that. It's how you build your credibility, right? You have an enormous amount of trust from your executive team that came via the credibility that you built over time. That comes in the little things. That comes in the, when people are not watching, what are you doing to actually build a good product, to inspire a team, to drive focus, and then yes, drive actual execution and throughput. That comes via, again, the grind.
We focus so much on what's changing inside the business, what's going to be different tomorrow, next week, and all those things. I think a huge part of the value of RevOps is what's not going to be different in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years. And guess what that is? Revenue is still the most important business process. If we're not generating revenue, nothing else matters. And so I think the reason that you two are gluttons for punishment and like to swim through the mud is because you know that you are affecting, in many cases, controlling the company's most important business process. And if you can do that well at the atomic level, if you can do that well at the strategic level, you're going to have a seat at the table. Just be patient. It's going to be okay. Any thoughts before we open it up for a little bit of Q&A? Anything you want to add on?
I think the big thing that I would add is like you have to be in front of your customer, like no matter what role that you're in. I probably spend 30, maybe sometimes 40, depending on kind of seasonality, on calls. Like a lot of time on calls. And sitting down like with our side by side with our reps, with our managers, like doing deal coaching on calls. And it might seem like, oh, like why are you doing like those types of details? Like I myself need to ground myself in reality and what's happening. And really, again, at the end of the day, bridging that gap between strategy and execution, you've got to be on the front line. And I think that it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone on all ops teams needs to be spending 30% of their time on customer calls. But like if you're going to go out there and say, rep, you need to do X, Y, and Z to get better, like you better know what you're talking about, right? And the best way to build credibility anywhere in the organization is to be able to talk to customers.
I can
100%.
vouch for you on this, Haley, because when we rolled out Highspot, you sat with us in a 2-hour session and you talked us through how to set up a stakeholder prioritization sync to get an enablement.
Nothing about our software.
Nothing about the software. Philosophically, here's the right way to think about revenue enablement inside your company. I was like, holy smokes, that was incredibly valuable. So thanks again. Anil, to you.
I think on that one, that's so key because I'm going to be in it riding shotgun with the people that you're trying to help. And that's so important. If you don't model that as a leader, then how do you expect folks to do that on your team? So to me, I think the only thing I'd end on is, there are three things actually about RevOps that will always be certain. One, it's reactive. Two, there's a grind. Three, you're going to be under capacity. That's just, it is what it is, right? You know this as you've scaled, Sean, like that this is just part of the game. So then I think about, all right, what do we do and why do we do it? To me, it comes down to three things. One is who do you want to be? Two is where you focus. Three is how you invest. All right, who do you want to be? This is actually what we talked about at the beginning of the panel, which is my mindset and how I carry myself is everything for the people that are watching. If I am reactive, they will be reactive. If I bring my urgency, if I bring my energy, if I bring my focus, if I bring diligence and a high bar to what I do, then I'm modeling for people what I want from my team. That is how you slowly, incrementally move from reactive to proactive. That kind of leads to the second piece, which is where you focus. Where you focus is exactly what we talked about, right? You have to be able to play at each of those altitudes. You have to be able to know for an SDR, what is their key pain point and how can I solve it tomorrow, while also building and designing an operating plan so that I can win a year from now, right? Know your focus, pick your places. If your focus is 20 things, we ain't going to do anything and you're not going to change anything. So find a way to drill that focus in at the top level. That will trickle down to your org. And then lastly, that leads to the last piece, which is how you invest. Invest in your people. Make sure that they know what's up and how you believe in them and how you're going to develop them. But then also, how are you going to augment them, right? To move from reactive to proactive, well, guess what? You need people that are growth oriented, that are curious, that are problem solvers, and that are going to be owners. Be very, very, very intentional about how you hire there, and yes, how you invest in the people that you have.
Really well said, Anil. We're going to open it up for Q&A here. That point about being under-resourced is very much linked to the point about prioritization. If you try and take on everything, there's no chance your small team is going to be able to execute that. So you have to be, as a leader, you have to be the one playing defense to a certain extent and pushing back on the executives that have the brilliant ideas about what has to happen and finding the right things to say no to. And I actually heard from somebody who I thought a really smart idea is they maintain a list of the things they're doing and they maintain a list of the things they're intentionally not doing, and they share both of those lists with the C-suite to say, unless anything changes.
In Asana.
A list in Asana,
okay,
of
just
course.
checking.
Of
okay.
course.
All right, we're good. Then it's a great idea.
And it's great to get everybody on the same page because then you can debate it, you can have that discussion. Thank you so much, Anil, Kumar, Haley Katsman. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.